The water was black, not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that swallows light whole. 3 tons of steel plunged nose first into the Black Sea with no warning and no sound, just the violent crack of metal against water, and then silence. Inside, a man fought with his hands clawing at a jammed door, lungs burning, vision narrowing to a pinpoint of fading silver above. Jason Statham was drowning, not in a script or a stunt rehearsal, but in real life. 60 feet below the surface, trapped in a sinking truck with only seconds separating legend from tragedy. The same man who had survived poverty, rejection, and a childhood spent selling trinkets on frozen streets was about to lose everything. But fate was not finished with him yet, because what pulled him back from that abyss was not luck, but something darker, something heavier, a lifetime of survival written in scars, silence, and an unbreakable will to rise. This is the story of how Jason Statham became indestructible, and why at 58 that very indestructibility has become his greatest tragedy. There are places where childhood is stolen before it begins, and Shybrook was one of them. A coal mining town in Derbyshire, England, with grey skies that pressed down like iron, and streets that smelled of soot, damp wool, and survival. Born July 26, 1967, Jason Statham entered a world that demanded toughness before tenderness. His mother Eileen danced not on grand stages but in small halls where applause faded before the lights came up. His father Barry worked 3 jobs: miner by dawn, street seller by afternoon, pub singer by night. Their hands were rough and their voices tired, but they never stopped moving. The Statham house had one flickering bulb above the kitchen table with thin walls, cold floors, and windows that rattled when the wind blew. Jason and his older brother Lee learned early that warmth was rationed, and so was hope. By age 8, Jason was following his father through the outdoor markets of Great Yarmouth, selling cheap perfume, fake watches, and trinkets wrapped in crumpled paper. Strangers walked past without looking while some spat, some laughed, and most ignored him entirely. But Barry never flinched as he smiled, called out, made jokes, and kept moving. Jason watched in silence, learning everything he would need to survive. Years later, he would say his father taught him to do a handstand before he could walk, and it sounded playful, but beneath it lived a truth that balance was something he had been practicing since birth. While other boys played football, Jason found the water at age 12 when he discovered diving at the Crystal Palace National Sports Center. He was painfully late since most divers started at 5. The coaches shook their heads and said he would never catch up, but he did not argue and simply stayed longer, trained harder, and climbed the ladder again and again while the janitor turned off the lights. The pool became his sanctuary, the only place where effort was rewarded not with rejection but with flight. He dove in winter, in rain, in silence while his hands blistered and his shoulders ached, but the water never lied and gave back exactly what he put in. By 1990, he represented England at the Commonwealth Games, standing 10 meters above the water with the crowd roaring below. For a brief, shimmering moment, the boy from Shybrook was flying. Then came 1992 and the British Olympic trials, where he placed 4th, 1 spot away from the team and 1 heartbeat from forever. The water gave him nothing, not a medal or a moment, just silence. He walked away from the pool that day and never competed again, but the lessons stayed with him. Discipline, endurance, and the knowledge that effort does not guarantee reward while only resilience guarantees survival. His father never told him to be strong, but showed him by never quitting when life gave nothing back. Jason left the water but carried the cold with him, along with the ache, the silence, and the refusal to quit when no one was watching. He would need all of it for what came next. London, 1993, brought rain that tasted like rust and streets that swallowed sound. Jason was 26 with no job, no plan, and no dream left to chase. He slept in cramped flats with peeling wallpaper in rooms where the radiator had died years ago, and some mornings he woke to see his breath fog the air. He worked the streets selling perfume, watches, and anything that could be wrapped in a story and sold for survival. Strangers cursed him, threw his wares back, and called him a hustler, a con man, a waste of space. But he nodded and kept moving. At night, after the markets closed, he trained with push-ups beside the bed and shadow boxing in cracked mirrors, fighting ghosts that only he could see. He had no money, no future, and no idea that destiny was already watching. Then came the light when a sports agency spotted him at Crystal Palace and saw his face. Not handsome in the Hollywood sense, but real, carved by struggle and weathered by survival. He modeled for Tommy Hilfiger, Levi's, and French Connection with paychecks that were small, but proved that maybe after all this, he still mattered. Still, fame did not follow, and between photo shoots, Jason returned to the streets, selling, hustling, and surviving. Then one day, destiny knocked when Guy Ritchie, a young director preparing his first film, was looking for someone to play a street hustler. When he met Jason, he did not see an actor but saw truth instead. Jason did not audition but told stories of London corners, deals gone wrong, and nights that smelled of rain and regret. Ritchie listened in silence, studying him like a scene unfolding, then leaned in and said quietly that Jason was the man who did not have to act because he had lived it. That sentence changed everything as Locke, stock, and 2 smoking barrels paid Jason $5,000, but it was worth more than gold. For the first time, his scars became currency, his silence became power, and his survival became art. The boy who once sold fake dreams was now selling truth, and Hollywood was about to pay attention. Fame arrived like thunder, sudden, deafening, and unforgiving. By 2002, Jason Statham was no longer the unknown hustler from Shybrook, but was the transporter. The man who drove through explosions, fought in 3-piece suits, and made violence look like ballet. The film earned over $43 million worldwide as casting directors wanted him, producers called, and magazines asked for interviews, but Jason did not celebrate and instead trained. He knew something Hollywood had forgotten. That action is not special effects but flesh, bone, and consequence. He refused stunt doubles, refused green screens, and refused to fake what could be done for real. "If I get hurt," he said, "at least it is honest." And he did get hurt with torn ligaments in Crank, bruised ribs in The Mechanic, and a dislocated shoulder in Safe. Some mornings his hands trembled just tying his boots, while nights became rituals of ice packs, painkillers, and silence. He never complained and never slowed down, filming nearly 2 movies a year between 2002 and 2010, flying between continents, living in hotel rooms, fighting on camera by day, and training in gyms by night. But not every fight ended in victory, as war stumbled in 2007. Killer Elite barely broke even in 2011, and Wildcard collapsed entirely in 2015 with a $30 million budget that returned only $6 million. Hollywood began to wonder if his time had passed, but Jason did not respond, and simply kept working because survival is not about defending yourself, but about outlasting the doubt. Then came the tragedy that changed everything in Bulgaria during 2011, on the set of The Expendables 2. The day was bright with blue skies and laughter between takes, the kind of day where nothing feels dangerous. Jason was rehearsing a chase scene near a lake beside Kun Liu, a 26-year-old rising stunt performer from China who was full of energy and dreams. That morning, Kun had told Jason that one day he would be where Jason was, and Jason smiled and told him to stay hungry and never lose that fire. Hours later, an explosion went off too early, and the sound tore through the mountains, not like thunder, but like time itself cracking open. Jason saw the flash, the wave of smoke, and the people running before silence fell. The kind that follows every disaster, real, raw, and merciless. He ran toward the wreckage, shouting and searching, but all he found was chaos with shattered lights, rising smoke, and air thick with disbelief. When it was over, the crew stood still with pale faces and lost eyes while Jason stared at the black water where moments earlier there had been movement and laughter. That night, alone in his trailer, he sat for hours replaying the scene in his head with the timing, the steps, and the sound. "You think you are invincible," he told a friend weeks later, until you see someone die doing what you love. From that day on, something in him changed as he trained harder but quieter, smiled for cameras while his eyes carried weight, and gave only one sentence when reporters asked about the accident. "We lost one of us." To outsiders, it was just an unfortunate headline, but to him it was a fracture, invisible and permanent. He never said Kuhn's name on stage, not because he forgot, but because he did not want it lost in applause. On every set since, before the cameras roll, he closes his eyes for a brief moment that no one notices. But in that silence, he whispers something only he can hear. That day, he stopped calling them stunts and called them risks paid in blood instead. And though he carried on jumping, fighting, and surviving, part of him stayed there by the lake in Bulgaria with a young man who once said he would be where Jason was and never got the chance. 2 years later, fate came for him again in Bulgaria during 2014 on the set of The Expendables 3. A blinding summer noon by the Black Sea found Jason behind the wheel of a 3-ton truck, rehearsing a stunt he had insisted on performing himself. It was meant to be routine. Drive, brake, stop. He trusted his body more than any machine while the crew trusted him as cameras rolled and engines roared. For a heartbeat, everything was perfect until it was not, and the brakes failed. In that single instant, time snapped as the truck jerked violently with tires screaming against asphalt, metal twisting, and the steering wheel bucking like a living thing. Someone shouted about the brakes, but the word was swallowed by the rising roar while Jason's muscles locked and his hands welded to the wheel. The edge of the pier rushed toward him with the sea waiting beyond it, black, endless, and indifferent, before impact came and the barrier exploded. The truck plunged nose first into the Black Sea with weightlessness followed by chaos. The windshield shattered in a storm of glass as water surged in, dark and heavy, swallowing light and sound while the world spun upside down. Jason's seatbelt wrenched tight and pressed into his chest as he tried the door, but found it stuck, kicked, but got nothing, and felt his breath thin as air became a memory. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that comes just before the end, and he thought of Rosie's smile, his son's laugh, and home. A life still waiting for him on the other side of the world before the thought vanished and was replaced by instinct, raw, feral, and defiant. He slammed his shoulder against the door once, twice, then heard a crack as light appeared, and the door burst open. Water dragged him downward while his lungs burned like fire, but he kicked, fought, and reached toward the surface that glimmered above him like a trembling silver line. When he broke through, the air hit him like a fist, and he gasped with a sound so sharp it tore through the silence. The crew on the shore erupted with voices, movement, and panic, as Sylvester Stallone was among the first to reach him, sprinting to the edge and shouting his name. Jason staggered out of the water, soaked, trembling, and alive with hands that had fought gravity for decades but would not stop shaking. He stood there drenched in salt and disbelief, staring at the sea that had almost claimed him. Later, Stallone would say that if anyone else had been behind that wheel, they would be dead, but Jason never replied. That night, he sat alone in his hotel room with the lights off, staring at the dark reflection in the window and whispering almost to himself that it should have been over. But morning came, and with it silence as he showed up to set as if nothing had happened, bruised, quiet, and ready. No one mentioned it, and no one dared as they filmed, laughed, and worked, pretending life had not just flinched. But something had changed, something permanent and invisible, and from that day on, Jason stopped calling them stunts and called them risks paid in blood. Though the cameras rolled again and the hero on screen seemed invincible, a part of him had already stayed behind somewhere under that black water where courage met mortality, and the man who had never feared anything finally learned what fear really feels like. The years that followed were no easier as he turned 50, then 55, and the scars did not fade but multiplied. Some mornings, he admitted once, "I cannot even feel my left shoulder." The pain was constant now, a dull hum beneath the muscles and a reminder that even iron rusts, but he never complained and instead trained, fought, bled, healed, and repeated because that is who he was. The man who refused to quit even when quitting was mercy. His doctors urged him to slow down, but he ignored them, telling Esquire that if he stopped moving he would rust, though beneath the humor was truth, and a quiet fear that stillness would mean the end. On set, the younger stuntmen watched him wide-eyed and asked if he still did his own fights, and he would nod, smile, and roll his shoulder, while pretending it did not hurt. Yet when the camera stopped, the silence told another story as he would sit alone in his trailer, massaging the same shoulder and breathing through the ache. Sometimes he would close his eyes and see the water again, dark, cold, and endless, because that day in Bulgaria never left him and lived behind every scene, every bruise, and every breath. But something else changed too as he found peace when he met Rosie Huntington-Whiteley in 2010, a 23-year-old model whose quiet grace disarmed every wall he had spent years building. She walked into his life softly, not dazzled by fame, but drawn to the silence behind his strength. "You do not talk much," she teased one night over wine, and he smiled, half amused and half wary, saying he had said enough in bruises. From that moment, the chase ended as what began as laughter over coffee turned into a love that grew like dawn, slow, steady, and certain. Their early days were made of little things like evening walks through Notting Hill, grocery runs in disguise, and her head resting on his shoulder as London rain tapped the windows. They cooked together in the tiny kitchen of his flat with pasta, laughter, and music, the kind of joy that does not need witnesses. For the first time in years, Jason was not acting, and with Rosie, he could breathe. By 2016, they were engaged, and in 2017, their son, Jack Oscar, was born. For a moment, Jason thought the world had finally stilled, as he would cradle the baby in his arms, marveling at the tiny fingers that clutched his. "This," he told Rosie one night while watching her rock Jack to sleep, "is the only fight I never want to win." In 2022, their daughter Isabella James arrived as a second heartbeat and a second chance. And holding her, he felt a quiet clarity that no role, no premiere, and no paycheck could ever outrun the meaning of home. Now in 2025, Jason Statham is 58, a father of two and a man finally at peace with both motion and stillness. He and Rosie live mostly in London, far from Hollywood's echo, where their mornings smell of pancakes and crayons and their evenings hum with laughter instead of headlines. He no longer posts and no longer chases, but protects, telling Esquire that privacy is their peace. Yet even peace carries its ghosts, and after years of impermanence, he still fears losing what he loves. Some nights when he returns from a shoot long after midnight, he stands quietly at the doorway watching his family sleep with the porch light glowing. Rosie's unspoken promise that home will always wait. He sits beside her, takes her hand, and in that stillness, the man who once lived by speed learns to slow down. He finally found peace, but even peace came with the fear of losing it. And perhaps that is why he guards it so fiercely, because after a lifetime of storms, Jason Statham knows that love is not loud, fame is not forever, and family is not what you show the world, but what you protect from it. There is a photograph Jason keeps in his wallet, not of a premiere or a film poster or a trophy, but a picture of his father Barry standing in the Great Yarmouth Market, smiling while selling trinkets to strangers who never looked him in the eye. Jason has never shown it to anyone, but carries it everywhere because it reminds him of something Hollywood will never teach. That strength is not born in victory, but inherited from struggle. His father never told him how to be strong, but showed him by never giving up when life gave nothing. And Jason understood then what he understands now, that survival is not about winning, but about rising again and again from the bottom. He did not win medals, but won something rarer, the strength to endure. Though the world would one day cheer his name beneath the brightest lights, somewhere behind his steady eyes still lingers that cold pool in Shybrook, and the quiet ghost of a boy who learned how to rise. At 58, Jason Statham stands not just as one of the last true action heroes, but as living proof that pain, when endured with dignity, can turn into power, and that survival itself can become art. He rose without privilege, endured without complaint, and triumphed without forgetting who he was. Today, he does not chase fame, but protects meaning, does not shout success, but lives it quietly in laughter, in love, and in legacy. As he looks out across the London skyline, perhaps he understands something most never do. That peace is not the absence of struggle, but the victory of having faced it and still standing tall. Every punch, every chase, every explosion you have ever seen him perform was not acting, but his truth, forged from hunger and pain. Behind the roaring engines and breathtaking action lies a haunting silence, The story of a man who nearly lost his life when a 3-ton truck plunged into the Black Sea only to survive miraculously. Now carrying the marks of time, injuries, and memories, Jason is not just a movie star, but living proof that even steel can be wounded, and warriors can still bleed. If you believe Jason Statham is not just an actor, but one of the greatest giants of true action cinema, hit like as a tribute to the man who turned hardship into legend. Because he did not just survive Hollywood, but rewrote what it means to be indestructible.